Good morning, everybody. If you have a Bible, you can open it up to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. This morning, we're going to be continuing on in a series entitled Jesus the King, where each and every week we're studying through the Gospel of Mark, trying to figure out who this person Jesus was and who he is to this day. And we're arriving at the same conclusion each and every week, that he was more than a leader, more than a teacher, more than an inspirer or a healer. He was king, and he is king, the king of the kingdom that we've all been looking for. So this morning, we're going to see, how do you approach the king? How do you approach the king? If you work in an environment where you have a boss, or maybe you work in an environment where you have like a really big boss, like the CEO of the massive company that you worked for, and you get this moment to be in front of the boss, what do? You have your best joke or you have your biggest accomplishment lined up, and the moment you see them, you want to lay that out because you want to make a good impression because you think, this is my moment. And if I can just lay it out in the right way, then this will be a good time. He'll remember me. Maybe another way to look at this is my wife and I will throw the "and I" in there, have been watching this season's Bachelorette. Okay? And at the beginning of the season, all of the potential suitors, they have to meet the Bachelorette, and they want to impress her. And so they have the moment when the limo pulls up, and the Bachelorette is standing there, and they have to get out, and they have like this 15 seconds to make an impression. And I kid you not, in this season, one dude came out in a penguin costume. And somehow he's still in. Okay? Like deep into the season, unless I haven't watched the last episode. And so he comes waddling out in a full penguin costume to meet a woman who he wants to fall in love with and wants her to fall in love with him. And apparently it worked. And sometimes we do that. When we're going to approach somebody, we put on our best fake self because we think maybe this will hide me. And he did pull off his penguin costume, and he didn't have the best hair going on. I'll just say that. Sometimes we do that. What do you do when you approach the king? What do you do when you approach Jesus? That's what we're going to see this morning in this story. And from there, I'm in verse 28 and by 28 I mean 24, of course. I'm in verse 24 of Mark chapter 7. Starts off like this: and from there he being Jesus arose, and he went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And so he shows up, Jesus, in this place. And now this place is a place where the Gentiles live. Now Jesus, if you didn't know, is Jewish. And so Jesus is in a place where everybody is pretty much Jewish. And he wants to take a little bit of a break. And so he's going to go to a place where people aren't really going to know who he is or haven't yet heard of him. This is the assumption that he's making. And so Jesus travels over to the city of Tyre and Sidon. Now let's talk about this place, because it's not the only time this region is mentioned in the scriptures. In fact, if you go back to the Old Testament, a long time ago, there's a very famous person who is from this city. And she's not well known. She's not a biblical hero. She's an anti-hero. Her name is Jezebel. And Jezebel is not, again, you don't want to be Jezebel. It's not the Bible character you aspire to. It was said of Jezebel that she would be eaten by dogs. And she was. Not the best way to go. Jezebel is from this place. And so the other time this place is mentioned in Scripture, it is laced with kind of evil overtones and violent canines. Some of you are not dog people, so you're going to love this week's story. And so Jesus heads there. Now the people there and the Jewish people do not get along very well. You could maybe call them enemies. You certainly wouldn't call them friends. It's kind of why Jesus went there. I can hide out. No one will notice me. So he enters a house, and he did not want anyone to know. So if you can just imagine Jesus traveling incognito. And so he's trying to sneak into town. Let's find a nice little vacation home, and let's chill out for a little bit. He enters the house. He didn't want anyone to know. Yet, I love this line, he could not be hidden. He could not be hidden. Even in the place where he thought, no one has heard of me, he could not be hidden. where Jesus showed up, all of a sudden it was known. I mean, this is true of today. You hear incredible stories about countries where Christianity is outlawed or Christians are persecuted, and yet somehow Jesus is still known there. Sometimes he shows up in dreams. Maybe you've heard of these, where Jesus just shows up to people because he wants to grab their heart. Or you've heard of the underground church in these persecuted lands. In fact, there are certain statistics that say where the church is most persecuted, it most grows. Because Jesus cannot be hidden. His message gets out. And so Jesus, incognito, tries to sneak in, yet he can't be hidden. Look at this next line. But immediately. It's like as soon as he checked in and got down and sat on the couch, there's a knock on the door. Thus is the life of Jesus. But immediately, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit. Now, this isn't really that hard for us if you watch the news at all. If you can imagine a Syrian refugee and her daughter. Right? I mean, we see pictures of this on CNN or Fox or whatever it is you watch all the time. A Syrian refugee and her daughter. Little daughter. 3, 4. Can you picture it? Can you see it? This story, by the way, is a story of a parent's love. It's a story of how far a parent will go for the child that they love. And so this woman and her little girl, some of you, you're the parents of a little girl. This is easy for you. Had an unclean spirit. I mean, isn't this the evil of all evils? Isn't it? I mean, the enemy attacking a helpless little girl just to ruin her with sickness and whatever. And this mom just has to watch as her little girl deteriorates. What would you do? Dads? Moms? What would you do in this moment if that was your little girl? So she heard of him. She heard of Jesus. Who knows what she had heard? But she had apparently heard something good. That this guy, there's a power to him. There's a sense about him. There's been some healings. There's been some phenomenal teachings. She probably didn't even care about that. All she wanted to know was this. Do you love my daughter? Will you love her like I do? Can you help her? But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit, she heard of Jesus, and so she came and she just fell at his feet. Switching the metaphors, it's now like a little kid who's begging their parent for something. And she just opens up the door of the house Jesus is staying in. She runs in there and she just falls at his feet. How do you approach the king? With humility, with desperation. That's how she approached the king. So she just falls at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. These lines, that line doesn't really mean that much to us, honestly. It's a line we could quickly read over, but it's a line packed with meaning. This is the trifecta of reasons why not to approach Jesus. She's a woman in the ancient Middle East. She has less of a legal standing. And it's already, there's other instances in the Bible, whenever Jesus is with a woman, there's like an attention paid to it. She's a woman, strike one. She's a Gentile. Jesus came for the Jews. He's going to get to that in a bit. She's a woman, strike one. She's a Gentile, strike two. She's a Syrophoenician. A Syrophoenician by birth, strike three. A woman, strike one. A Gentile, strike two. A Syrophoenician by birth. You know what that means? Bye, Phoenicia. Come on, that's a better joke. I practiced that all week. Come on. All right. She's out. 3 reasons why not to approach Jesus the King. She had her reasons, all of them by birth, by the way. She couldn't change any of those things. She couldn't change where she was born. She couldn't change that she wasn't a Jew. She couldn't change that she was a woman. She couldn't have changed any of those things. And so by birth and the culture of the day, she is the low person on the totem pole, the last person that gets to approach Jesus the King. And she's walking into a room where she is surrounded by who? Male, Jewish followers of the rabbi, his disciples. I mean, you want to talk about like the power structure. They're at the top, she's at the bottom. Brilliantly, we're going to see Jesus here do so much more than just love this woman. We're going to see him flip the power struggle of the culture, because he's going to look at this woman who has every reason not to approach Jesus the King and say, come on, come here. You know what this teaches us, by the way? You have no reason. You have no reason not to approach Jesus the King. Not because of something you were born into. Not because of something you've done. Not because of a label that has been passed over you. Not because life hasn't turned out the way you wanted it. You could fill in the blank, I'm sure. These are my 3 reasons. I did this. I'm from there. My parents were this. You could create every reason not to approach him. There is no reason not to approach Jesus the King. There is no birthright, and there is no action, there is no past, there is nothing. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. She had every reason not to approach Jesus the King, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Oh, what a parent's love will do, right? She begged him. In fact, there's another story or another writing of this story in the Gospel of Matthew. And in that particular story, you know what the disciples do? They say, hey, Jesus, can you go ahead and send her away? Like, she's kind of getting annoying. We're trying to vacation here. Remember, this was supposed to be our R&R time. And she, a woman, a Syrophoenician, a Gentile, okay, the worst of the worst. The Syrophoenician is in there, by the way, to describe where they're at, but also to remind us that this isn't just a Gentile, it's the lowest of the low of the Gentiles. And she's getting in the way. And so you have the people who have all of the power and the position close to Jesus trying to throw out the bottom rung. So can you just go ahead and get rid of her, please? She's annoying. And she just keeps begging. She will not give up. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So the he here, of course, is Jesus. He said to her, now this next little interaction is a fun one. It's a fun one, especially because in our Western reading of this, it seems really weird. In fact, it kind of is. But look at Jesus' response to this woman who is begging for his help. He said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Are you following what Jesus is saying? It's not right. You're going to take what is rightfully theirs and give it to whose it's not. I mean, there's like 18 different metaphors going on here, but let's look at one of them. At the very surface, he's saying this. Imagine a family that's really hungry, and the family is super hungry. They're starving, and there's just one piece of bread, and you have the kids, and you have the family pet. He's like, come on. You love Gizmo, but It's not right to feed the dog when your kids are starving. Right? Like you wouldn't do that if it was really down to life and death. So that's one of them. Now let's cut through it. Let the children. So who's the children in this story? The Jewish people. The Jewish people. Let the children. That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, here in this, I'm the parent, and I came, like Paul says in Romans, to the Jew first and then to the Greek, and I've come, and so my word and my teaching and my ministry and my power and my miracles and all of these things, who are they for? They're for the Jewish people. They're for my children. I have to feed them first. They're desperate. They're hungry. They've been waiting for the Messiah. Them first. Can you see the disciples over here in the corner? Yeah, get them. Her. Get her, Jesus. Let her know. Let her know who has first right. We do. Let her know about the kingdom you're going to establish and how we're all going to get a place at the table. Let her know, Jesus. You tell her. Your chests are starting to puff up a little bit. Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and to throw it to the dogs. So who's the dog? The woman. The non-Jewish people. The Gentiles. Particularly in this location. I mean, they knew dog in Tyre and Sidon. What were the dogs in that place? Those are those violent animals that ripped Jezebel to pieces. Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and to throw it to the dogs. What would you do in this moment? You've been begging Jesus, pleading on behalf of your child, and this is the response he gives you. Why? Why? Notice what Jesus didn't say. He didn't say no. He didn't say, I won't do this for you. He didn't say leave. He just gives her a really confusing answer to us. Now let me jump down to verse 29 real quick. He, Jesus, said to her, for this statement. This is literally translated in another translation as, what an answer! There's something in her response that even Jesus sits back and goes, whoa, that was a good answer. What is it? Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. We've already established this point. This woman, from a birth perspective and from the perspective of anyone who would have been involved in this situation in the moment, or anyone in that culture would have looked at this woman and they would have assumed this. This woman has no right. She has no right to approach Jesus the King. And Jesus, in so much as tells her this, it's for the children first and not for the dogs, right? That's what this is about. And the woman answers this, yes. 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 Yes, what? What is she saying yes to? Tim Keller, in his book, Jesus the King, that we have been reading through as we went through this series, he points out this. We don't have a context for this in our society because we are so driven by individual rights that when anyone ever says this group has a right over that group, we always throw our hands up and say, that's not fair. I have every right as much as anybody else. This woman doesn't do that. You know what she does? She says, yes. In other words, she says this. You're right. You're right, Jesus. I have no right whatsoever to be here in front of you. I have no merit. My birth doesn't allow it to me. My actions haven't created it. I have done absolutely nothing to deserve this. to deserve being in your presence. I don't have a list of accomplishments. I don't have anything that I can point to. Yes, you're right. Friends, this is the first half of the gospel. This is the first half of the gospel that Jesus came to teach. The first part of the gospel is this: yes, I have zero right on my own merit to approach you, Jesus. I have no right. It's not a birthright. It's not something I can earn. I am the Gentile woman from Syrophoenicia. You are too. We all are. We have no right to approach Jesus the King. She gets it. Yes. But she doesn't stop there. And the gospel doesn't stop there. If the gospel just stopped as you and I have no right to approach Jesus, it'd be a pretty depressing gospel. It would not be good news. It'd be horrible news. In 2 words, she explains the gospel so beautifully. What's her next word? Lord. Yes, Lord. You know how many people have called Jesus Lord according to the Gospel of Mark thus far? 0. No one has yet called him Lord. No one has yet given him the name that is rightfully his. And so in the presence of all of the men, the Jewish men who are his chosen rabbis, in their presence, the people who the gospel was originally for, right? In their presence, she shows them something that even they have not yet understood. She shows them the gospel. Yes, I have no right, but Lord. In other words, if you're this king, if you're this Messiah that the Jewish people have been talking about for all of these years, if you're that same God that, as I read in Nehemiah chapter 9 earlier, that even when they rejected and rebelled against you and they had no merit, yet you were still kind and gracious and merciful. If you're that God, if you truly are Lord, then even though I have no merit, you can still show me love, grace, and mercy that I don't deserve. This is the full gospel. This is both sides of it. Keller says it this way, that when you begin to understand the gospel, you realize that you are more wicked than you can comprehend, but more loved than you could ever imagine. Both of these things are the true gospel. My complete inept, my fact that I have no merit whatsoever, but that he is Lord still. That he gives me his merit. That he loves me despite my inadequacy. You know, even when we come to faith, we're really not very good at this, I think, of understanding this. Even when we step into Christian faith, a lot of times when we approach Jesus the King or God in prayer, how do we do it? If you're anything like me, you know what I do? I lay out my merits in front of him when I approach him. When I approach him in prayer, even if I don't say it outward, there's always, or a lot of times, there's something inside of me that's like, well, Jesus, I've actually been pretty good this week. I read my Bible 6 out of 7 days. I showed up to church. I even sang. We begin like Jesus is our boss, like laying out our accomplishments and our merits in front of him, saying, okay, now that I've done that, I also have this thing that I want to ask for. And what this story is teaching us is that there is no merit before your king that you can create. But it's okay. Why? Because he's Lord. Because he's Lord. Because despite that, his love, his grace, and his kindness, she continues, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Here's what she's saying. I get it. I have no reason to demand anything of you. And I'll just, honestly, she's like, I'll just take the leftover. I'll just take what falls to the ground. I'll take anything that you have left over. She understands that he has so much to offer that even the leftover will be enough. She's like, just go ahead and give me that. And Jesus looks at her and he says, that is an incredible answer. You understand the gospel. You understand, in fact, one commentator points out, she might be the first person in the Gospel of Mark who actually understands the gospel in all of its fullness. Despite who I am, you are Lord. Your merit instead of mine. Look what happens at the end. She went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. What she prayed for happens. The little girl is brought back to life. Oh, do you see yourself in this story? Do you see yourself in this story? I told you this story, it's about the story of a parent's love, right? About a woman who was in a foreign place, a harsh place, who would beg for the healing of her daughter. I mean, the love that she had as a parent would compel her to just keep going despite opposition so that the daughter, the child, might be healed. And this story is a beautiful picture of a parent's love, and it's a beautiful picture of the Father's love. You know who I am in this story? You know who you are in this story? You are this little girl. You are this little girl that is helpless, that apart from God is overtaken by the world, by sin. And you know what you needed? An advocate. An advocate who was willing to do something out of love, so beyond what is normal. An advocate who was willing to approach a situation that was even dangerous. I mean, for this woman to approach Jesus, it was reckless, it was dangerous, it was unheard of. You needed an advocate who would do that for you. And you have it. You have it in Jesus. Who would come despite your sin, despite your brokenness, who would come. And he would come, why? So that you and I wouldn't be treated like the dog, we would be treated like the child. So that we could become the child, his child. And he would come and he would face opposition just like this woman did. And he would come and he would offer up his life. He would, in essence, become the dog. Beaten, whipped, treated so poorly. Why? So that you and I could be the child. So that the enemy would no longer have control. So that we, like this little girl, would be healed and set free. This is the gospel. The story of a parent's love for you. Jesus, he didn't just go and beg for our healing. He gave his life up for it. So you could be his child.